Daphne Vale didn't expect the morning's flower delivery to end with one of New York's most powerful men mistaking her for a runway model. "Excuse me," said a deep, sharp voice as she balanced a bouquet of white peonies in one arm and reached for the elevator button with the other. "Are you here for the shoot?" She turned, startled, nearly dropping the vase. A tall man in a tailored navy suit with a jawline so sharp it could cut glass looked her over with narrowed eyes. His hair was dark, neatly styled, and his watch probably cost more than her entire monthly rent. "I'm sorry, what?" she asked, blinking. "The shoot. For the spring campaign," he said, gesturing toward the polished glass doors behind him that read, ZA Industries Private Floor. She narrowed her eyes. "I'm delivering flowers, not modeling them." The man blinked. Then slowly a faint crease formed between his brows. "You're the florist? Is that a problem?" "No," he said, recovering quickly. "No, of course not. You just don't look like one." She raised an eyebrow. "What does a florist look like?" He gave a short laugh and looked down, clearly caught. "Fair point." She stepped into the elevator and he followed. It was just the two of them as the doors slid shut. She caught him glancing at her again, and this time it wasn't just confusion. It was interest. "I'm Daphne," she said, shifting the flowers. "From Blossom District." He nodded. Zayden Ashford. That name sent a jolt through her. She didn't follow finance closely, but even she knew who that was: tech mogul, investor, and the youngest self-made millionaire in New York. He owned half the buildings in Midtown. She suddenly became painfully aware of her jeans, her faded work apron, and the smudge of pollen on her cheek. But he didn't seem to care about any of that. "You have a great smile," he said suddenly. She blinked. "What?" "You smiled when you corrected me about being a florist," he said. It looked real. "People don't smile like that in this building." She laughed softly, looking down. "Well, I don't work here. I've noticed." The elevator dinged. He held the door open for her. "Come on. I'll walk you to the office." She followed him down the glass corridor, catching glimpses of city skyline between the massive windows. Everything smelled like leather and money. She placed the bouquet on the receptionist's desk, but before she could politely excuse herself, Zayden spoke again. "Are you free tonight?" She blinked. "Excuse me." He looked completely serious. "Dinner. As a thank you for brightening up my morning. And possibly making me look like an idiot." She stared at him. "Do you ask every florist out to dinner?" "No," he said simply. "Just you." She hesitated. This had to be some kind of joke. Or a bet. Or something. "You really mistook me for a model?" He held her gaze. "I still think you could be one." She opened her mouth, closed it, then tilted her head. "Fine. Dinner. But only if you promise not to say anything cheesy like that again." He grinned. "Deal. 7 o'clock. I'll pick you up. I'll meet you there." He looked amused but didn't argue. "Then I'll send a car." She started to decline, but the receptionist suddenly handed her a card with a driver's number already printed on it. She blinked at the sleek, gold-embossed logo. "Right," she muttered. "Okay." As she headed back to the elevator, her heart was pounding. She couldn't believe what just happened. She wasn't delusional. Guys like Zayden didn't go after girls like her. Not unless there was an agenda. But he seemed different. Still, she'd go to dinner. If only to figure out what the hell he actually wanted. By 7, Daphne stood in front of an upscale French restaurant in Soho, dressed in a navy silk dress her best friend had loaned her and heels she instantly regretted. A sleek black car pulled up, and before she could react, a door opened and Zayden stepped out. "Wow," he said, his eyes sweeping over her. "Now you really look like a model." She rolled her eyes. "That counts as cheesy." He laughed and offered his arm. "Come on." I had them hold the private terrace. The terrace was pure magic. Dim fairy lights, soft jazz, and a view of the skyline that looked like it belonged in a movie. A waiter in a tuxedo pulled out her chair and poured her a glass of wine she couldn't pronounce. "You do this often?" she asked, eyeing the menu. "What? Take florists out to dinner?" She gave him a look. Zayden leaned back, studying her. "No, I don't really date. Right?" she said, unconvinced. "I don't," he said seriously. "It's usually complicated." She sipped her wine. "So why me?" He didn't hesitate. "Because you're not pretending. Everyone in my world is playing a part. You smiled at me like you meant it. That's rare." She looked at him, unsure what to say. But it wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them. Like he actually saw her. The rest of the dinner flew by. She told him about her shop, her stubborn landlord, her ridiculous cat named Nacho. He told her about his company, how lonely it could get at the top, and how he missed building things with his hands. He laughed easily, listened intently, and never once checked his watch. When the waiter brought dessert, he surprised her by ordering peach tart tatin, her favorite. "How do you know?" she asked. "You mentioned peaches when we were talking about flowers," he said with a shrug. "I listened." Her chest tightened. No one ever listened like that. After dinner, he walked her to the car. Just before she stepped inside, he gently touched her hand. "I want to see you again," he said, voice low. She hesitated. Her heart was screaming yes, but her head wasn't sure. This was too fast. Too extravagant. Too unbelievable. "I'll think about it," she said finally. He smiled softly. "You're allowed to say yes." She looked at him. "And you're not what I expected. Good or bad?" "I haven't decided yet." He laughed. "Let me know when you do." As the car pulled away, she glanced back at him standing on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, watching her go. She had no idea what she'd just walked into, but she hadn't smiled like this in a long time. 2 days passed before Daphne heard from him again, not that she'd been counting. She hadn't. Not once. Not even when she checked her phone during deliveries or paused at red lights, wondering if he'd texted or called. She didn't even notice that her phone was fully charged at all times. Just in case. She was in the back of the shop arranging a spray of coral garden roses when Marla, her assistant, called out from the front. "Daph, there's a guy asking for you. Says he's from ZA something?" Daphne nearly knocked over a bucket of tulips. When she stepped into the front room, a man in a crisp black suit handed her a cream-colored envelope with her name written in calligraphy. "Mr. Ashford asked me to deliver this personally, Miss Vale." She stared at the envelope. "Why?" The man offered a polite nod. "He said you'd understand." Inside was a single note written in elegant penmanship. "I haven't stopped thinking about you. Meet me tonight. You choose the place. Anywhere. Z." She read it twice. Then a third time. He didn't suggest a restaurant. He didn't try to impress her with another 5-star dinner. He left the choice to her. That night, he met her on the rooftop of her apartment building in Queens, where she'd strung up fairy lights between 2 rusted pipes and laid out a blanket beside a takeout pizza box. She wore a cozy cream sweater and jeans. No heels. No makeup. Just her. Zayden arrived in a charcoal coat and scarf, clearly overdressed for the setting, but he didn't complain. He sat beside her and reached for a slice without hesitation. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said as the wind tousled her hair. "I wasn't sure you'd invite me somewhere that smells like pepperoni and radiator steam," he replied. She laughed, leaning back on her elbows. "This is my favorite spot in the city." He glanced around at the skyline glinting in the distance, the twinkle of traffic below, the faded graffiti on the brick wall beside them. "I can see why," he said. They sat in silence for a moment, the city humming beneath them. Then she turned to him. "You said people in your world wear masks. What about you?" He looked at her, quiet. "I wore one for a long time," he said finally. "I built a company from nothing. I couldn't afford to be vulnerable. Couldn't show weakness. Not when everyone was watching. And now I don't know who I am without it." She studied him, the way his jaw tightened slightly, the way he avoided her eyes when he said it. "You don't have to be anyone tonight," she said. "Just be here." When he looked at her again, something in his expression softened. He reached for her hand, tentative this time. When their fingers laced together, her chest tightened unexpectedly. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," he said. She hesitated, then blew out a breath. "My mom used to say I'd never be enough for someone who had everything, that I was too simple, too emotional. She thought love was only worth something if it made you suffer." Zayden's grip on her hand tightened. "She was wrong," he said. "I know that now, but sometimes I still hear her voice." He leaned in slightly. "Then let me drown it out." The kiss was slow, deliberate. No fireworks, no stage seduction, just a quiet, undeniable pull. When he pulled back, she rested her forehead against his. "I don't want to be a project," she whispered. "You're not," he said. "You're the first real thing I've felt in a long time." A week later, everything changed. It started with a phone call from her landlord. They're doubling the rent next month, he said bluntly. Someone made an offer I couldn't refuse. Daphne's stomach dropped. You said you'd give me notice. You promised. I'm sorry, sweetheart. It's business. She hung up, heart pounding. She'd poured everything into the shop. She didn't have the savings to relocate, not in Manhattan. Not even in Brooklyn. Her chest tightened. Her dream was slipping away, and there was nothing she could do about it. That night, she met Zayden at his penthouse, something she'd never done before. The elevator opened into a space that looked like it belonged in an architectural magazine. Glass walls, abstract sculptures, a fireplace that flickered even though there was no chimney. He met her at the entrance, tugging off his cufflinks. You okay? You look pale. My shop, she said. I'm being forced out. His face darkened. Who's the landlord? Some holding company. I don't even know who owns the building. He turned, walked across the room, and grabbed his phone. What are you doing? Fixing it. No, she said sharply. Please don't. He stopped, surprised. I don't want you to fix this. Not like that. Daphne, I'm serious. If you make one call and suddenly everything's solved, I'll always wonder if I could have done it myself. He exhaled slowly. You're different. You keep saying that, but you don't act like it. He looked at her then, really looked. You're right. She stepped closer. I need to fight for something on my own. Even if I lose. He nodded once. Then I'll back off. Thank you. But I'll still be here, he said. If you fall. She nodded. I know. 2 days later, she received an anonymous tip from a local business owner. An affordable location was opening up in the West Village. Still expensive, but not impossible. She visited the space, and it had large windows, exposed brick, and just enough room to keep her dream alive. She applied for the lease that afternoon. Meanwhile, things between her and Zayden grew deeper. They didn't spend every night together, but when they did, it was never extravagant. They walked through farmers' markets, argued over which bakery had the better croissants, and once stayed up until 4 in the morning building a bookshelf in his penthouse because she said he needed at least one thing that wasn't imported from Italy. One evening, while they were painting the new shop's front display together, her elbow slipped and left a streak of lavender paint down his shirt. He looked down at the stain, then at her. You did that on purpose. I didn't. He dipped his brush into the can and flicked a dot of paint at her sweater. She gasped. You billionaire child. He grinned. Say that again. Billionaire. Child. He lunged toward her and she shrieked, laughing as he tackled her gently onto the floor, both of them covered in paint and breathless. Then, without warning, his expression shifted. I want you in my life, Daphne, he said quietly. Not as a distraction. Not as a secret. As someone who matters. She stared up at him, heart-thudding. Then stop keeping me at a distance, she said. He nodded once. Okay. That week, he introduced her to his board during a cocktail event at the Met. She wore a black dress she'd borrowed from Marla and heels that threatened to break her ankles. But Zayden never left her side. Not once. This is Daphne Vale, he said to every executive, every investor, every skeptical pair of eyes. She's brilliant. And she's with me. By the end of the night, she felt like she'd stepped into another life, but one that was slowly starting to feel like her own. Until the news broke. The next morning, headlines screamed. Zayden Ashford's new romance sparks merger scandal. Florist or front? Rumors swirl around CEO's mysterious girlfriend. Daphne stared at her phone in horror, reading the words over and over. Photos of them on the Met steps. Her name. Her shop. Her life dissected by strangers. And worse, accusations that her presence was part of a distraction strategy, a PR move to soften Zayden's image ahead of a high-stakes merger. She didn't even wait to call him. She went straight to his office. When she walked in, he was already on the phone with legal, pacing. He looked up, startled. Daph. Is it true? What? Did you use me to make yourself look better? To look more grounded? More human? No, he said instantly. I never. She held up a hand. Don't lie to me. I'm not. He crossed the room. I didn't plan any of this. But yes, the timing helped. The board liked the idea of me being with someone real. Someone not from our world. She took a step back. So I'm a business strategy now? No. He stopped, his voice cracking. You're everything I didn't know I needed. Her throat tightened. But you didn't stop it. I didn't know how. She nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. Then maybe you don't deserve me. And before he could stop her, she turned and walked away. The wind off the Hudson felt colder than usual as Daphne stood outside the shop, watching the last of the customers trickle out. A father carried a tulip-stuffed bouquet while his daughter skipped behind, her laughter echoing off the narrow West Village street. The bell above the door jingled softly as it closed behind them, and the silence that followed sat heavy on Daphne's shoulders. She locked the door, flipped the sign to closed, and leaned against the glass. It had been 6 days since she walked out of Zayden's office. 6 days without a call, without a car pulling up outside her building, without a single note or flower from the man who once made a rooftop feel like the center of the universe. She didn't know what was worse, the silence or the fact that she was starting to understand it. He'd let the world turn her into a pawn. Whether it was intentional or not, she had become part of a narrative she hadn't written, and now she was left trying to scrape her dignity off the floor while reporters camped outside her building and influencers speculated which small business girlfriend would be next. The worst part? She still missed him. Marla poked her head from the back room, her braids swinging over one shoulder. You heading home? In a bit. Just want to straighten up first. You sure? You've barely eaten today. I said I'm fine. Marla gave her a look but didn't argue. The door clicked shut behind her. Daphne exhaled slowly, turning back toward the counter. She moved aimlessly, organizing ribbon spools, wiping down scissors, trimming stems that didn't need trimming. The silence was too complete, the air too still. Then the bell above the door rang again. We're closed, she called without turning. I know. Her hand froze mid-reach. That voice shouldn't have been here. Not after 6 days. Not after everything. She turned slowly. Zayden stood just inside the doorway, his coat dusted with rain, his collar slightly askew like he'd rushed here without stopping to fix it. His eyes were tired. Not the kind of tired that came from lack of sleep, but the kind that came from carrying things too heavy for too long. You shouldn't be here, she said. He stepped forward just one pace. I had to see you. She crossed her arms. I made myself very clear. I know. And you were right. I should have shut it down the second it started. You didn't. I thought it would fade. I thought if I ignored it, it'd disappear. I didn't want to make it worse by drawing attention to it. She shook her head. You didn't ignore it. You benefited from it. His mouth tightened, but he nodded. I did. That admission knocked the breath out of her. He didn't try to spin it. Didn't pretend. She leaned against the counter, hands gripping the edge. So why now? I've spent the last 6 days watching every version of us get picked apart by strangers. And the only thing I kept thinking was how none of it mattered if I didn't have you. She looked away. You think one speech fixes this? No, he said quietly. I think actions do. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. He placed it on the counter between them, not pushing it toward her, just letting it sit. I withdrew from the merger. Her head snapped up. What? I stepped down from the CEO spotlight. I'll stay on the board, but I'm done being the face of the company. Let them chase someone else for a headline. You're walking away from everything. Not everything, he said. Just the parts that made me forget what actually matters. She stared at him, heart racing. Why would you do that? Because power doesn't mean anything if I can't look you in the eye. Because I don't want to run a company that turns the people I care about into shields. Silence stretched between them, tense and fragile. I didn't ask you to give up your life, she said finally. No, he agreed. You didn't. But I needed to. She stepped around the counter slowly. What happens now? He looked at her like she was the only person in the world. That depends on you. Her breath caught. I'm not asking you to forget what happened, he said. But I'm asking you to believe that I'm trying. Not because it's convenient. Not because it looks good. Because I don't want a life that doesn't have you in it. Her voice was barely audible. You hurt me. I know. I don't trust easily. I'll earn it back. You can't buy your way out of this. I wouldn't dare try. She took one more step, close enough to see the faint scar above his eyebrow, the way his jaw tensed like he was scared she might still walk away. I don't want to be part of your image, she said. You won't be. I want to be seen for who I actually am. You are. She studied him for a long moment. Then quietly she asked, what if I'm still angry? He didn't hesitate. Then be angry. I'll still be here. She looked down, her breath shaking. I hate how much I missed you. He reached for her hand, slow and careful. I missed you more. She didn't know who moved first, but suddenly his arms were around her and everything else disappeared. The cold, the headlines, the fear, it all slipped away. His lips found hers, and this time it wasn't hesitant or apologetic. It was desperate, raw, real. When they finally pulled apart, she pressed her forehead to his. I need you to understand something, she whispered. Anything. I don't need your money. I don't want your world. I just want you. He nodded, eyes fierce. That's all I've ever wanted to give you. They stood in the quiet shop, surrounded by the scent of eucalyptus and garden roses, and for the first time in days, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they could still write their own story. Later that night, Zayden took her hand and guided her to the back of the car waiting at the curb. But when she started to climb in, he stopped her. Wait. She turned. He pulled something from his coat pocket, not a ring, but a small, black velvet box. Her stomach dipped. I'm not proposing, he said quickly. Not yet. I know better than to rush you. But I wanted to give you this anyway. She opened the box. Inside was a necklace, delicate, simple, a single gold charm in the shape of a wildflower. I found out what the first bouquet you delivered to my office was, he said. White peonies, wild freesia, and one small wildflower tucked at the base. You didn't even know it was there. But I noticed. She touched the charm, her throat tight. I wanted you to have something that reminded you of where we started, he said. Before all of it. Just you and me. A mistake that turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. She reached up and fastened it around her neck, the charm resting just above her collarbone. I don't want perfect, she whispered. I want real. Then you'll always have me. She looked at him, eyes shining. Okay, she whispered. Let's try again. And this time, when the car door closed behind them, she didn't look back. 2 months later, the new Blossom District shop opened on a crisp Saturday morning with the scent of fresh jasmine wafting through the open doors and a line of customers winding halfway down the block. The name was painted in soft gold across the front window, and inside, every surface held something blooming. Daphne stood behind the polished oak counter, her counter greeting customers with the same quiet joy she always had, but now there was something steadier in her. A foundation that hadn't been there before. She knew what she was worth. She knew what she'd built. And she wasn't building it alone anymore. The bell above the door chimed, and she didn't have to look up to know who had just walked in. She could feel it, the shift in the room, the quiet hush that always followed him. Zayden crossed the space in a simple dark sweater and slacks, but he still looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not a flower shop. He handed her a paper cup. Mint tea, he said. You skipped breakfast. She took it, smiling. Thank you. And how would you know that? You answered my call this morning with one word and zero emotion. She laughed softly and took a sip. I was tired. You were pacing. She leaned against the counter. It's opening day. I'm allowed to be nervous. You're allowed to be proud. She looked up at him. I really am. I know. He stepped closer, just enough that their arms brushed, but not enough to make her feel crowded. He'd learned that about her, that she liked space, but not distance. Are you staying long? She asked. Only until you kick me out. The bell chimed again, and a couple entered, murmuring over the arrangements near the front window. Zayden stepped aside, letting Daphne work. He never hovered, never inserted himself. He simply stayed close enough that she could feel him there. By early afternoon, the crowd had thinned enough for her to breathe. She sat on the stool behind the register, sipping cooled tea, while Zayden leaned against the shelf beside her, arms crossed. I got an invitation this morning, he said. She glanced at him. To what? A gala. Charity event. Next Friday. Black tie. The usual. She raised an eyebrow. And you want me to come? I want you to tell me if it's something you'd enjoy. She tilted her head. I'm not going to be your accessory, Zayden. I know, he said. That's why I'm asking. She studied him. What's the cause? Children's hospitals in the Northeast. Funding for art therapy programs. Her expression softened. That's actually something I care about. I thought it might be. She nodded slowly. All right, I'll come. But I'm wearing flats. He grinned. I'll have a car with extra legroom. She nudged him with her shoulder. That evening, after closing up, they walked hand in hand along the Hudson. The path was quiet, the city lights flickering on the water. She tucked her arm through his, enjoying the rare moment of stillness. I've been thinking, he said. That sounds dangerous. He smiled. I want to do something with my time now that I'm not running the company. She looked over at him. Like what? I'm not sure yet, but I know I want it to matter. I want to build something again. Just slower this time. She squeezed his arm. You'll figure it out. He looked down at her. You really believe that? I believe in you. He stopped walking. She turned to face him, and something in his eyes made her heart flutter. There's something else, he said. She waited. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, square box. Her breath caught not because she didn't see it coming, but because she had. "I've thought about how to do this 100 different ways," he said. "At a gala. On a rooftop. In a 5-star restaurant. I would have hated all of those." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm doing it here. No flash. Just you. Just us." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, one-round diamond set on a delicate gold band. It was understated. Meaningful. "I'm not asking you to be someone else," he said. "I'm asking you to be exactly who you are. With me. Always." She stared at the ring, her eyes burning. "I don't want perfect either," he said. "I want you." She met his eyes. "Ask me." "Daphne Vale," he said, voice quiet, steady. "Will you marry me?" She nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "Yes. Of course I will." He slid the ring onto her finger, and when he kissed her, it wasn't dramatic or showy, it was grounding. Warm. Certain. The next week, the gala was held at a historic museum in the Upper East Side. All marble staircases and chandeliers. Daphne wore a deep plum dress with sleeves that fell off her shoulders and a pair of comfortable velvet flats. Zayden never once let go of her hand. They danced once, slow and quietly, in a corner away from the main floor. He kept his hand at the small of her back, and she rested her head against his shoulder. "Do you know what the first thing I noticed about you was?" he asked. "My elbows." He laughed. "Your smile." She looked up at him. "It wasn't just pretty," he said. "It was real. It hit me like a punch to the chest. I didn't know how badly I needed something real until I saw it." She leaned in. "Then you better keep earning it." "I intend to." The room blurred around them. The music faded. And for a moment it was just them again, no headlines, no boardrooms, no misunderstandings. Just two people who'd found each other when they weren't looking. Months passed in a rhythm that felt like theirs. Mornings were spent in the shop, afternoons in parks or bookstores, or tucked into small cafes where no one cared who he was. Zayden started mentoring young entrepreneurs, meeting them in the greenhouse attached to the new Blossom District store where he insisted the light was better for ideas. Daphne kept building her business, her life, her future. She hired 3 more employees, launched a subscription service, and began teaching floral design workshops on weekends. Her name started to appear in local magazines, not as a footnote to someone else's success, but as a headline on her own. They didn't need a grand wedding. Instead, they chose a garden just outside the city, surrounded by wildflowers and a handful of people who mattered. No press. No cameras. Just promises whispered under a willow tree, hands clasped, eyes locked. Later, when the last guest had left and the sun dipped below the treetops, Zayden pulled her close and rested his forehead against hers. "You still have that same smile," he murmured. "And you still look like you're trying to figure me out. I hope I never stop." She wrapped her arms around his neck. "Then don't." The stars blinked into view above them, soft and endless. And in the quiet between laughter and kisses, they stood in the middle of the life they'd built from a single, ridiculous misunderstanding. Hers was the kind of smile that could change everything. And his was the heart that had been waiting for it all along. The sunlight filtered through the gauzy curtains of their West Village apartment, casting a soft golden hue across the hardwood floors. Daphne stood in front of the full-length mirror in the bedroom, adjusting the neckline of her sage green sleeveless jumpsuit. Her fingers paused at her necklace, the delicate wildflower charm he'd given her months ago. It rested just above her collarbone, still as light as the day he'd placed it there, but now heavy with meaning. Zayden entered the room behind her, barefoot, still towel drying his hair from the shower. He caught her reflection in the mirror and leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "You're staring," she said without turning. "I know," he said. "I still can't believe you said yes." She met his eyes in the mirror. "You didn't exactly give me a reason to say no." He grinned and walked toward her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "We're meeting your dad today, just a reminder." "I remember." "You nervous?" She turned in his arms, resting her palms on his chest. "I haven't seen him since I was 20. Nervous doesn't even begin to cover it." Zayden's hands gently traced the curve of her back. "You don't have to do this." "I do," she said. "Not for him. For me." He kissed her forehead, then stepped back. "If he says anything out of line, I'll handle it." "You sure?" Her voice didn't waver. "I've changed since he last saw me." Zayden nodded and reached for his watch from the dresser. "Then he's about to meet the woman who built a business from scratch, survived a PR storm, and made me rethink everything I thought I knew about life." Daphne smiled faintly. "You always say the right thing." I mean it. Later that afternoon, they sat at a cafe on the Upper West Side, neutral territory. Her father arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a blazer that didn't quite fit and sunglasses he didn't take off until he was seated. Daphne stood when he approached, her posture composed. "Hi, Dad." He hesitated, then gave a stiff nod. "Daphne." Zayden extended a hand. "Zayden Ashford. Fiancé." Her father's eyebrows lifted as he shook his hand. "Figured you'd be older." "I get that a lot." The conversation started tense. Her father asked about the shop, about business. He didn't ask the questions a father should, not about her happiness or her life. But Daphne didn't flinch. She answered calmly, redirecting the conversation when necessary. When he made a passive comment about her mother's influence, she looked him straight in the eye. "Mom was wrong about a lot of things," she said. "Especially about me." Her father sat back, clearly surprised. Daphne folded her hands. "I didn't come here to be forgiven. I came here to show you that I'm okay. That I'm more than okay." He didn't respond right away. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "You seem steadier." "I am." Zayden reached across the table and took her hand. She didn't look away from her father, didn't shrink beneath the weight of his silence. When the meeting ended, he said goodbye with an awkward pat on her shoulder. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. It was something. As they walked down the street, Zayden glanced at her. "You all right?" "I think so," she said. "It's strange. I didn't need his approval. I just needed to stop carrying his voice around in my head." He squeezed her hand. "You were never defined by him. I know that now." That evening, back at their apartment, she curled up on the couch beside him, barefoot, a mug of vanilla tea in her hands. "You know," she said slowly, "when I opened the shop, I used to picture what success would feel like. I thought it would be about validation, about proving something. And now I think it's about peace, about waking up and knowing I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Zayden brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "I want to build a life with you that always feels like that. You already have." He leaned in, kissed her gently. "Then I'm doing something right." They spent the next few weeks preparing for the next chapter quietly, without fanfare. No press releases, no interviews. They planned the wedding with intention, choosing a date in early spring when the trees would just begin to bloom again and the city would feel soft and new. Daphne designed her bouquet herself, ranunculus, white lilac, and a single wildflower tucked at the center. Marla cried when she saw it. On the morning of the wedding, the garden was wrapped in soft morning light. Guests gathered beneath a canopy of ivy-draped arches. Zayden wore a deep gray suit, no tie, and a wildflower boutonniere pinned to his lapel. His hands were steady, his eyes never leaving the path where she would walk. When Daphne appeared, every conversation stopped. Her dress was simple, elegant, ivory silk that moved like water. Her hair was swept back with a few loose curls framing her face. She didn't wear a veil. She didn't need to hide anything. As she walked toward him, her eyes locked on his. The world narrowed to just the two of them. They exchanged vows beneath the willow tree where they'd first promised each other forever, and when they kissed, it wasn't showy or rehearsed. It was quiet, full of certainty. Later, at the reception, they didn't do a first dance. Instead, they stood together at the edge of the garden, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Zayden turned to her. "You know what the board said before I stepped down?" "What?" "They said I was risking everything for a woman with no connections, no pedigree." She looked up at him. "And what did you say?" "I said they were right. And I'd do it again." She laughed, resting her head on his shoulder. "Wildflowers grow in the most unexpected places." He kissed her temple. "So do love stories. They built a life that was uniquely theirs. No penthouse. No flashy headlines. Just a brownstone in Brooklyn with creaky floors and a lemon tree on the balcony." Zayden launched a foundation for young entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities. He mentored quietly without cameras and spent his afternoons in neighborhood cafes where he took meetings over black coffee and wore sneakers instead of suits. Daphne's shop continued to thrive. She opened a second location in a small coastal town upstate where wildflowers grew freely and tourists fell in love with her arrangements. She started writing a book, not a memoir, but a guide to building something beautiful from the ground up. She called it Rooted. One night, as they sat on the back stoop watching the stars blink to life above the city, Zayden rested his hand on her knee. "You ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't mistaken you for a model that day?" She smiled, eyes fixed on the sky. I would have delivered the flowers, walked away, and probably never seen you again. Terrifying. Why? Because I wouldn't have known what I missed. She turned to him. Some people spend their whole lives trying to be seen. You were impossible not to see. And in that moment, surrounded by the scent of jasmine and the hum of the city they both loved, they knew their story wasn't built on grand gestures or perfect timing. It was built on choice, on resilience, on the quiet, unwavering decision to love each other not for what they had, but for who they were. And that made it everything.